Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Liz Player, and I am the founder and director of the Harlem Chamber Players. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for our program, Langston and Beethoven, Black and Proud, by Terrance McKnight, with Kyle Walker on piano. I would also like to thank Yuen Chin, founder of the Harlem Cultural Collaborative and Harlem One Stop, for putting together this Harlem Digital Salon Series and for having us as guests. This event is part of the Harlem Renaissance 100 celebration, which is a multi-year, community-wide initiative spearheaded by the Harlem Cultural Collaborative. With over 40 esteemed Harlem cultural institutions involved, its aim is to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Harlem Renaissance and to empower the community. You can learn more about this initiative and future events for Harlem Renaissance 100 and the Harlem Chamber Players by visiting our websites, www.harlemrenaissance.org and www.harlemchamberplayers.org. Thanks also to Nadal Quinari for putting the final video together. After the show, which is about 25 minutes, we will return for a talk and Q&A with the artists. I hope you enjoy this presentation, Langston and Beethoven, Black and Proud, by Terrance McKnight, with Kyle Walker on piano.
No peace! No peace! No peace!
Did you ever walk into a fire hose with the water turned up full blast? Did you ever walk towards police guns when each step might be your last? Did you ever stand in the face of snarling dogs and not move as the dogs came? Did you ever feel tear gas burn your day, your night, your dawn? Your dawn when the water's a rainbow hue. Your dawn when the guns are no longer aimed at you. Your dawn when the cops forget their jails. Your dawn when the police dogs wag their tails. Your dawn when the tear gas canisters are dry. Your dawn when you own that star in the sky. Your dawn when the atom bomb is yours. It's yours. Your dawn when you have keys. Have the keys to all the doors. Your dawn. Ever forget your dawn. drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon. I heard a Negro play down on Lenox Avenue the other night by the pale, dull pallor of an old gaslight. He did a lazy sway. He did a lazy sway to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that piano moan with melody. Oh, blues. Swaying to fro on a rickety stool. He played that sad, raggy tune like a musical. Boom! Sweet blues coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues! And a deep song voice with a melancholy tone. I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. I ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I was going to quit my frowning, put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, 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 went his foot on the floor. He played a few chords and he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. I don't want to live no more. I wish that I had died. All through the night, he crooned that tune. Stars went out. So did the moon. The Negro stopped playing and went to bed while those weary blues echoed in his head. You got the weary blues. He slept like a rock, or a man that's dead. I went down to the river, sat down on the bank. I tried to think, but I couldn't. So I jumped in and sank. I came up once and I hollered. I came up twice. I cried. If that water hadn't been so cold, I might have sunk and died, but it was cold in that water. It was cold. I took the elevator. 16 floors above the ground. Thought about my baby. Thought I would jump down. I stood there. Thought I might jump down. I stood there. I hollered. I I stood there, I cried. If it hadn't have been so high, I would have jumped and died, but it was high up there. I would have jumped and died, but it was high. So since I'm still here living, I guess I will live on. I could have died for love, but for living I was born. Though you may hear me holler, you may see me cry. I'll be dog sweet, baby, if you gonna see me die. Dee-dong-dong, dee-dong, dee-dong, dee. Life is fine. Fine as wine. Life is fine. Black as the gentle night, black as the kind and quiet night, black as the deep productive earth, body out of Africa, strong and black as iron, first smelted in Africa. Song out of Africa, deep and mellow song, rich as the black earth, strong as black iron, kind as the black night, my song from the dark lips of Africa, deep as the rich earth, beautiful as the black night, strong as the first iron, black out of Africa, me and my song. Hey buddy, look at me. I'm making a road. I'm making a road for the cars to fly by on. Making a road through the palmetto thicket for light and civilization to travel on. I'm making a road for the rich to sweep over in the big cars. Leave me standing here. Sure, the road helps everybody. The rich get to ride, and I get to see them ride. I ain't never seen nobody ride so fine before. Hey buddy! Look at me. I'm making a road. Well, I'll tell you, son. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters and boards torn up, places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners. Sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Insurance man. I heard his knock, but he couldn't get in because my door was locked. Week ago Tuesday, he came back again. This time I thought, I'll let him in. Insurance man said, "It's paying time, madam. You are 6 weeks behind." I said, "Mister, just let it slumber. I'll pay in full when I hit the number." Insurance man said, "Suppose you die. Who's gonna bury you?" I said, "Why?" I'm Terrance McKnight. Kyle Walker is my pianist. I fuse the poetry of Langston Hughes with the music of Beethoven, two men who loved humanity, loved art, thought that art could bring us together. And look at us, here together, enjoying Langston's poetry and Beethoven's music, all jumbled together. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Harlem One Stop. Thanks to the Harlem Chamber Players. I wish you all the best in the coming weeks and months, and hopefully we can do this live one day soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Kyle Walker's still at it on piano. I'll see you all next time. Take us out, Kyle.
Thank you, Terrance McKnight, for putting this together. Thank you, Kyle Walker, for just both of you for the beautiful performance. And I would like to welcome everyone back. And I would also like to introduce you to the artist. Terrance McKnight is the one who conceived this program. And for those of us who are just now joining, this is Langston and Beethoven, Black and Proud, by Terrance McKnight with Kyle Walker on piano. Terrance McKnight is a radio host on WQXR, and you can hear him weeknights at 7 p.m. Terrance is also a longtime friend. He's been with the Harlem Chamber Players since almost the beginning. He has been a major influence and helped us grow, and he serves on our advisory committee as our artistic advisor. He is on the boards of the Bagby Foundation and the McDowell Colony. Terrance also regularly curates concerts and talks at Merkin Concert Hall, the Billie Holiday Theater, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the Museum of Modern Art. Welcome, Terrance McKnight. Next, we also have pianist Kyle Walker, who is a strong advocate for social equality and believes music can speak to social issues better than verbal language can. As an advocate for social justice, Kyle is a founding member and chamber music producer for the Dream Unfinished, an activist orchestra. Kyle is in demand as a soloist, and some highlights from the past season include solo appearances with the Color of Music Festival, a solo recital tour throughout the East and West Coast, and a Lincoln Center appearance alongside Miss America 2019. Kyle has performed in numerous halls throughout New York City and across the country. We are happy and proud that Kyle has recently also joined the roster of the Harlem Chamber Players. Welcome, Kyle. Next, we're going to have a discussion with the artists. And for those of us who are in Zoom, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. We're also streaming live on the Facebook pages of Harlem One Stop, Harlem Ren 100, the Harlem Chamber Players, and on WQXR. For those of us, we would also love for you to let us know your location in the chat box and in the comments on the Facebook pages. So now we have the questions. First, I'd like to address to Kyle. Just a basic question. Kyle, would you please tell us, how did you come about choosing classical music as your profession?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Terrance and I were joking the other day. We were thinking, well, when did we get into classical music? And we were saying, well, it kind of chose us, but it's actually kind of true. I think I always had other interests. I, at one point, was studying to be a journalist and worked for a little bit in television news. But all throughout that period, I had been studying classical music, majoring in music, and kept coming back to music. And at one point, I had a very influential teacher who really influenced me to pursue it more as a career. And I think it was from that point that I really started figuring out more of who I was as a classical musician and choosing to play composers like Margaret Bonds, for example, who composed Troubled Waters. And for me, I mean, classical music is definitely like a big core of my life, not just classical music, but all music. So I also love jazz and I mean, all different styles of music, not necessarily great at playing all different styles of music, certainly some, but I definitely love just being immersed in as much music as I possibly can. And I have always been that way, I guess, from birth, really. I think my mother always sung to me as a child, and that really set the stepping stones for, you know, where I've gone so far in my life as music.
Thank you so much. And really, that was just a beautiful performance, and just love your musicality and the feeling you put into your playing. The next question I have is for Terrance McKnight, actually in 3 parts, or maybe really 3 questions. I read that your 96-year-old grandmother gave you advice when you moved to New York. What was that advice? And also, your maternal family was heavily involved in civil rights in Mississippi in the 50s and 60s. Would you speak about this? And also, how did you end up in classical music?
Kyle always blames this on his mother. He's always talking about his mother singing led him to this. So thank you, Mom, because Kyle did a wonderful job. I love performing with him. And thanks, Liz, for having us do this. This work is so important to me. You know, my grandmother, we buried her February 1st, 2008. And I moved to New York February 2nd, 2008. And so when I got the job, I called her. It was in January, and I called her. I said, Grandma, you know, I won't be able to, I'm not going to be as close because I'm moved to New York. You know, I was living in Atlanta at the time, and, you know, I'm going to be in New York, so, but I'll still come see you. She said, I know, son, I know. I said, well, do you have any words of advice for me? No, I had no advice, son. So I just held the phone. So about maybe 45 seconds later, she said, well, if you're going up there, you got something to say, you get out in the middle of the road and you say it. Don't go hide behind no bush. And that was her advice to me. So I had to find something to say and then have the courage and the heart to say it and the love to say it, you know, and try to speak to a wide audience out of this place of love and care. And that's what I tried to do, because my family, you mentioned my maternal family, they were, you know, my parents grew up in Mississippi, and my grandfather and his cousin, when they were trying to vote in the 50s, because they were landowners, had an opportunity to vote, but a lot of Black folks couldn't do it in the mid-county down there. And so they formed the NAACP chapter and got voter registration happening down there.
Wow.
And so I grew up hearing a little bit about those stories. It was dangerous. You know, we had some folks killed down there, you know, registering to vote. But that activism was something that was important in our household, whether it was talked about or not. You felt it. It was something that I would feel when I would go to Mississippi. My grandfather was always going to meetings. And so it's just a part of my DNA, trying to do something, trying to make life a little better for people. And music has been sort of my vehicle to do it. And classical music, you know, I grew up playing in church, but when I got to Morehouse, my Glee Club director gave me a ticket to go see the Atlanta Symphony, and Andre Watts was the pianist, and that did it. That was it.
I'm going to break for a minute because I see a question in the chat box, and before it disappears, I'd like to ask this one. This is from Roberta Todd, who's asking, do you see any relationship in Beethoven's composition and his African heritage? I understand his mother was the daughter of a Moor and father was German. And also added, this was very relaxing and loved the poem. Would you like to answer that, Terrance?
Roberta, thanks for writing in. Yes, Beethoven's late music, man, the rhythms, the polyphony that he finds in there, the syncopation, the harmonies, those late sonatas, some of those variations. Kyle was playing some of the variations today. It's very soulful. And you know, some of his music, you can listen to that late piano music or those late string quartets, and it almost sounds as he's like a preview of ragtime. You know, it almost sounds like a preview of jazz. And you know, he was a great improviser. You know, that was the thing with Beethoven. You know, he would show up for his concerts, the orchestral parts would be written, and he would essentially improvise his whole part. You know, so that spontaneity, that improvisatory style that he was so good at, you know, perhaps that had to do something with his heritage, you know, so yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I see another question in here. Someone is asking about troubled waters, and that was my next question for Kyle. It was only in the past year that I heard this piece by Margaret Bonds, and I fell in love with the way you played it, Kyle. Would you tell me what this music means to you and what you want the listener to hear or feel when you perform this? Your bio states that you believe music can speak to social issues better than verbal language can. Would you speak more about this?
Yeah, so, you know, this is actually a lot of going back to the first question of why I chose classical music as a profession. When I was really coming out of grad school and trying to find my own, I guess, stance in the classical music world of where I was doing a lot of searching for composers, particularly Black composers, that had fallen through the cracks, and somehow I stumbled across this piece among many other wonderful pieces, and started to put together these programs that I called Bach to Black Notes, because Bach is, I mean, probably my very favorite composer, Bach or Beethoven, and so I would start a program with a piece by Bach, but I would pair it with Bonds, or with Florence Price, or with Coleridge Taylor, or many new composers that haven't even gotten any sort of recognition like Margaret Bonds has in the past couple of years. And this particular piece, Troubled Waters, I found really interesting to program because I find that it's really accessible to a wide variety of audiences, mainly because of the tune that it's made after, which is Wade in the Water, a spiritual that many people know, and even if they don't know all the words to it, or they're not really conscious of the fact that they know it, they've definitely heard it at some point in their lives. And it's quite catchy too. You know, for classical music, I think that it definitely has a lot of other styles sort of woven into the texture, particularly in the last section, when it starts really low on the piano. You know, it kind of has this momentum that builds up, and you don't find that a lot in classical music, and so I think that's always fun to program. But more importantly, I think it shows the lineage really of where Margaret Bonds came from, that she had the training. She trained at Juilliard, so she had, you know, one of the best trainings imaginable. as a composer and a pianist. But she also knew her roots. She knew where her family essentially came from, at least to the best of her extent, and was not at all afraid to use that in her writing. And I think that this is an exact example of like the way that we can bring more culture into classical music, and that it really is the people's music. You know, it's not always just this Western European art form, more or less, but it's a lot deeper than that. And I find that this is a really, really wonderful piece to introduce people to that. It's also really fun to play. I mean, it's like, I just think it's like the perfect length. It's like 5.5 minutes, you know, and a lot of times these great classical music pieces can kind of be off-putting for some people because of the length sometimes. So I think it's just a wonderful length of a piece.
Oh, wonderful. And and beautifully played. There was a question in here, and you spoke a little bit about Margaret Bond's training. And there's the question here from Terry Parker. What is the best way to get young children involved in classical music? Kyle, would you like to take that?
Ooh. Well, yeah, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about the way that you can influence young children. It certainly depends on the age, but I work a lot with preschool aged kids, 2, 3, 4 and up. And I think that there's never a time that's too early. And I mean, my wife and I just had our first child 16 days ago. She's a 16-year-old human
Wonderful,
being.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we've already started, you know, influencing her with music and in every way that we possibly can, you know, during diaper changes, singing to her. And I mean, there's a lot of science behind, you know, playing Mozart for babies and things like that. I don't know, really, I'm not qualified to talk necessarily about that. But in terms of engagement, I think the more that we can share that these people, these like idols, more or less, like Beethoven, were human beings. They also had struggles. They also had other parts of their life outside of music. I think that that is a really important point to share. And, you know, going back, I guess, for a second about just music speaking more sometimes than words can. I think when we understand the background of these composers and we understand some of the struggles that they were going through, one of the most well-known struggles of, we know that Beethoven was going deaf later in his life. But there are many other composers that, you know, we hear so many amazing works from, but we don't know all about the rest of their lives. And the more that we learn about their lives, the more that we understand, hey, everybody can find some creativity inside of us. You know, we're not all Beethoven necessarily, but I mean, myself, you know, I was asked the other day, do I compose? And I suppose I compose in the sense that I sit down every day and I make stuff up at the piano, but I never really write it down. I've never had anything published in that capacity. So I think that if I had been influenced more in that way as a young child, to know that, you know, we do idolize these big people's names, mostly being white male composers. But, you know, if we see that there are so many different types of composers of all different backgrounds, all different colors, all different faiths, you know, we can see that this is a really human thing. And it's really something that I think kids in particular are innocent enough to sort of understand at a very young age, before they're sort of filtered through the lens of whatever society or societal problems we're going through at the time.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's great. Thank you, Kyle. The next question, I'm going to switch gears a little, is for Terrance, coming back to the music. You use spoken word over classical music. Where did this idea come from? And in the Weary Blues, there's a vocal line. Would you also talk about where this melody comes from?
comes from a desire to see my people in the concert hall. You know, oftentimes we go to concerts and we don't feel ourselves, you know?
Right.
You don't see anybody who looks like you. You don't see any representation of Black culture. Sometimes, you know, Black folks, you know, and whether they're in the audience or performers, you have to shape shift a little bit in order to fit in. So I wanted to involve an artist who loved Black people. His poetry, you know, he spent all of his career writing about Black culture and listening to everyday Black folks up in Harlem telling their stories, Black folks around the world and working people around the world. That's who Langston Hughes was. So I figured if I could find a way of bringing two of my favorite artists together who were so similar, you know, if they were my friends, you know, and they were, I'd probably send them out on a date because they were that similar. Their outlook on life was very similar. So I thought they would make a good couple. And I thought if I could pair Langston with Beethoven, I could break down some of those boundaries around classical music. Sometimes people think of it as being stuffy and elitist. Well, if I could put Langston's words on top of it, it brings it down a little bit, makes it a little more accessible, a little more human. And that was my desire to do that. It's always been my desire to do that since I was a young person, bringing different people to playing in church, you know, finding a language to bring various types of people together under the umbrella of like music and love and one spirit. And one day I was just at home and I was reading Weary Blues and I thought, man, this sounds like Beethoven. Dude talking about, I wish that I was dead. Beethoven said that. So let me look for something Beethoven wrote that might fit these words. And so the first one I put together was Weary Blues. And so it just went from there. And the last one that you heard today was, I don't remember, American Variations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the last one that I took on because, you know, when Langston was coming up, to call somebody Black was a curse word. You know, you call somebody Black, you better be ready to fight. But Langston tried to uplift that word, you know, Black is often associated. I mean, you know, Malcolm talked about it. You know, when you look in the dictionary and look up what Black means, it's often very negative. So Langston wanted to change that. Black as the gentle knight, Black as the kind and quiet knight. He's flipping our understanding of Black. And so I thought, I'm gonna juxtapose this with what we know as My Country 'Tis of Thee and really uplift our understanding and our appreciation of what Blackness could mean. And so we can all walk around with a little more dignity around classical music.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. And just a follow up to that question, can you talk about that melody in the Weary Blues?
Oh yeah, that's my grandfather. My people down there in Mississippi, in the Delta, you know, Louisiana. And I'm always thinking about those folks because without them, you know, I wouldn't be around here, you know, without the courage that they had. And so when I heard that, when I'm reading Weary Blues and Langston talks about, he heard that Negro sing, you know, and Kyle gets to that part, or Beethoven gets that part in the music, I thought, oh, this gotta be bluesy. So I gotta construct a melody where I can insert some flats in here, you know, some minors in here and really make it bluesy to bring that thing out. And so when people hear it, they feel like, oh, that's me. That's my culture. That's what I like. He's singing the blues on top of Beethoven. And then, you know, you kind of forget that you're actually listening to classical music. It's like just music. It's just music.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. I have another question for you, Terrance. The title, Langston and Beethoven, Black and Proud, is provocative in itself, as well as your choice to use the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance writer Langston Hughes, also known as the original jazz poet over the music. Oh, I think you answered this. You answered over the music of an 18th century European classical composer, Beethoven. So you talked about how you combine Langston and Beethoven. Would you also speak to the title of this program itself?
Oh yeah, Langston was black. Beethoven was proud, you know. And according to some of his students, you know, Beethoven, he had a student who went to his house as a kid, and he said when Beethoven opened the door, he was like, oh my God, his skin is so dark. You know, he's got this scruffy beard, which is dark enough, but his skin was so dark. Another student said, Master, if you saw the paintings that they were painting of you, you wouldn't even recognize yourself because they're painting you, it doesn't even look like you. Mm-hmm. You know, and so this term blackamoor, you know, was used with Beethoven. And, you know, he had dark skin. I used to say to my students at Morehouse, if Beethoven was in America, he would have been sitting on the back of the bus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Kyle, the next question is for you. I've seen you post about how much you love Beethoven's piano music. Would you tell me more about Beethoven and what you love so much about his music?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in high school, I went to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts for high school, and I was constantly surrounded by people, you know, way better than me, college students, grad students, and I remember sitting in a studio class, which we were required to go to every week, 2 hours on Fridays, and I mean, people would play these amazing pieces. You know, I remember hearing all the Chopin ballades and two different Liszt concertos, and I mean, just crazy stuff. And I remember then hearing pretty much all the Beethoven sonatas, because every year my studio did a project where we would take one big work, a group of pieces, and everybody in the studio would split up different pieces. And one year it was Beethoven sonatas. And I was given one of the smallest sonatas. It was Opus 14, number 1, which is a 2-movement sonata. But it's a wonderful piece. It was my first introduction, really, other than I had played like the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata and Fur-Elise, like the stuff that they all give you when you're, you know, learning how to play the piano. But this was my first really, I hadn't heard it before, you know, very intense Beethoven sonata. And it was like the most wonderful music ever. I didn't realize it starting off learning it, but I started hanging out with some of my older colleagues, and we ended up going to a music festival in Switzerland. So not Germany, but in Switzerland, so close to Germany. And it was just amazing being so close to the atmosphere where Beethoven had been writing. And one of my friends, he's also a black pianist, wonderful black pianist, Mikhail Darmody. I don't know if you remember him, but he's part of Harlem Chamber Players as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so we were in high school together, and he was older than me at the time, and he introduced me to, oh my goodness, so many of the other Beethoven sonatas, not necessarily like the most famous ones, but just he found all of these really interesting and intimate moments in so many different sonatas, and it taught me so much about, I remember one passage about like the circle of fifths, which is in music, I can't explain it necessarily that briefly, but it's a huge concept, you know, something that, you know, you could study for years and years, or at least in an entire college course, you can study the circle of fifths. And there is one passage in the final movement of Beethoven Sonata Opus 10, number 3, D major, where it's just the most beautiful coda section, and all it is the circle of fifths. But the way that Beethoven unravels it is just this most like amazing and not obvious way to end a piano sonata. You know, a lot of times we think of sonatas as these huge bombastic works, almost like the symphonies, and many of them are, but so many of them, such as the Weary Blues, which is Opus 109 sonata, is not necessarily your stereotypical, you know, classical structure, sonata structural form sort of piece, but it's very lyrical, very intimate, very soulful, as Terrance puts it. And this is a lot of what attracted me originally to Beethoven's music. And the more that I have explored his music, the more that it becomes deeper in that sort of a way, in this soulful sort of a way. There were a couple of years, I think 4 or 5 years in a row, before I moved to New York City, that I came here with my wife, who's a violinist, and we both would play together in the Beethoven Institute, which was a summer festival that used to happen at Mannes College. And every year they had a end of the week concert, which was about, I think we started at 10 or 11 a.m. and it always went till about 10 p.m. And the whole day was just Beethoven. And to most people, that would sound completely ridiculous to attend a concert for like 12 hours. And it was sort of ridiculous. But once you were in there for a little while and you heard performance after performance, you didn't really want to leave, because it was just like nothing sounded the same. All of these pieces were so unique. And especially when you compare his early works to the late works, the string quartets, to the piano sonatas, to the piano trios, to, I mean, so many different types of works that he wrote. And yeah, I could keep going on, but Beethoven is definitely not an underrated composer.
Beautiful.
It's not so complex for me. For me, I was a student. I was at Morehouse at the time, and I had this little book about Beethoven, and I read this. I was at home. It was like over Christmas, and I read this little passage where he said to us, he said that the best days of his life were the days when he could say his mother's name and she would respond to it. His mom died when he was like 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And they were just super, super tight. And he, you know, attributed much of his success and to her. And so when I hear Kyle talk about his mother, and I know my mother just drove me around for piano lessons and organ lessons and guitar lessons and trumpet lessons, whatever, you know, kind of music I wanted to take, she supported that. So when I read that about Beethoven, I was like, oh, this is somebody I can get into. And that began my journey with him.
Great, beautiful. Okay, Terrance, the next question is for you. The opening piece, Demonstration, would you tell us more about this piece? And also, I know this is an ongoing project of you juxtaposing Langston Hughes' poetry to Beethoven's music. How has this project evolved?
Well, it started with Weary Blues. You know, like I said, I was just at home reading some Langston one day, and then I thought about Beethoven immediately. Well, Demonstration came about because New York Public Radio was doing we do every year a Martin Luther King Jr. special presentation at the Apollo. And this was sort of a commission. I was given you know, the title of the program, and they wanted me to come up with something, some kind of musical component for that. You know, Martin Luther King and I sang in the same glee club at Morehouse, not at the same time. He was there a little, you know, before I was, but
Right.
So I'm very, you know, just to be able to say his name is, makes me very emotional. So MLK and Langston had a personal relationship, but it wasn't public because Langston was an accused communist. And he and King knew that if they associated in public, it might have a negative effect on the movement. So they stayed apart publicly. But think about what King talked about. He always talked about dreams, you know. And Langston wrote about dreams deferred. So they influenced one another. And then they went to Africa together in the 60s. And then in 67, Langston wrote this poem, Demonstration. And so I wrestled with the poem and listened to as much Beethoven as I could. And I think I found something that kind of seized the moment. I think it kind of addressed the music in a way that I thought the audience might find interesting and attractive. And then for this program, you know, I thought it was timely because of what we're all experiencing. So, you know, art can be timeless. And with those two giants, you know, Beethoven and Langston, you know, when
when they write from a place of love and concern for people, that's always going to be timely. And so that's what this project, that's where it is right now.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for both of you, Terrance and Kyle. How do you negotiate being in this world of classical music as Black men in a field to this day has so few Black and brown people? Would you talk about some of your experiences, what you have done to try to bring about change, and what you would like to see?
So as a pianist, I find it really empowering, actually, because one of the things, I keep going back to the time when I first came out of school and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to essentially do this thing as a pianist. And the nice thing about being a pianist is that we have a lot of options. And so on one hand, being a Black pianist, you know, whether you're a man or a woman, at that, it really benefits you in many ways to understand the world of spirituals, the world of just overall, well, spiritual music, which I don't mean to just mean spirituals. And as a pianist, that's a really enlightening sort of thing to be in, because it always, you know, it kind of takes you to church all the time in a way, which is really a way to reinvigorate your spirit every time you perform, or every time I perform, like with singers, which is quite often, and that's something that is pretty unique for a pianist. But when it comes to performing music, you know, out of the Black church tradition, that's something that I feel like is really personal to me. And it's not that other people can't play that music, but that's something that I've sort of been able to claim as like, that's mine. Now, as a soloist, I find it also empowering, because when I play a program for a solo piano sonata, solo piano program, I can really do whatever I want, which is awesome, because I don't have a committee or a board telling me that I have to program a certain number of such and such pieces by such and such composer. If a concert presenter doesn't want me to play something, they can make a request about it, which usually, you know, if there's a problem, they have made a request, and I'll accommodate their request to the best of my ability. But I've never been flat out turned down for wanting to program majority Black composers on a program, which is not all the programs that I play either, but when it has been, that's not been an issue for me. And I find that that's a step in the right direction for the classical music world. What we need to do more of, I believe, is, you know, have a situation where people are all knowledgeable about Black composers. And right now, we still are in a situation where people that are studying music in schools are not taught about Margaret Bonds, are not taught about Julius Eastman, are not taught about you know, many Black composers that have done very, very well, but also Black composers that are still young and building their own repertoire, just as many non-Black young composers are building the repertoire. And I think that that's something that we can change. And by we, I mean that I feel like I have a voice in that way, that I can change that. So I look at the glass half full in that perspective. I think as a pianist, I feel pretty empowered as a Black male pianist. But don't get me wrong, it's not, I'm not saying that this is the easiest route to be a classical musician. It's not the easiest route to be a Black man as a pianist, but I do find that for me, I've been able to find ways of staying positive and helping that sort of, like I said, reinvigorate the spirit for myself every time I perform music by Black composers, every time I perform music for Black audiences, which is a really big thing. And yeah, I'll keep it at that.
Wonderful. Terrance, do you want to speak to that as well?
It's all I know. You know, when I was in high school, I remember this kid, one of my classmates said something, I think he was ahead of us. He was like, we wanted a Black history course. And he said, oh, I don't think there's enough Black history to fill a whole semester. So,
Wow.
And
Really?
so I came home and I told my sister that, and she said, well, you're going to go to Morehouse. We're going to put it into this. You're going to Morehouse. And when I got to Morehouse and I got in that glee club, excellence. That's what we were about. Excellence, man. We sang in German, Italian, French, Yoruba, Igbo. We sang in all these different languages, and it was all about excellence. And you really understood your place as a Black man in that college to understand your history, understand your culture, and just be excellent. And when I graduated, the chairman, U.Z. Brown, told me, he said, now when you leave here, you understand that you're not only representing yourself and your family and Morehouse College, but you're representing your people. And so when I came to New York, I brought that desire to be excellent. And I figured if I can be the best Terrance McKnight that I can be very excellent at being that person. So I just want to be an excellent Terrance McKnight, and I'll go wherever that takes me. I'll be fine with that, because an excellent Terrance McKnight is centered in love and care and empathy and concern. Right. And if I can just be good at that, I'll let the chips fall where they may. I'll live with that.
Wonderful. Okay. There are several questions in the chat box, so I'm going to go up here.
Hey everybody, thanks for writing us. Thanks for being here. This is fun.
We also, just to let you know, it's 5:08 now, so we've gone beyond, but there's a lot of questions in here. So let's get to one. Deborah James, Metropolitan Opera just released a statement of commitment to hire conductors of color in the wake of the current uprisings. Kyle and Terrance, are you hopeful that such commitment will yield substantial results?
As long as they don't ask me to conduct. I mean, I think that would be great. I think that would be great. And I think to have stories about, Black culture, it'd be wonderful. I think, I think we got a good example of what's possible when Kathleen Battle sang there a couple of years ago. Oh, that audience. It was full, it was beautiful. The ethos in the room, I mean, you felt like it felt American, you know what I mean? It had that feeling. It didn't feel like you had to shapeshift or that you were going into another culture. It felt very much like us. And I think, I felt that same way when Winton wrote a blues symphony was played at Philharmonic a couple of years ago. You got that same feeling. Everybody felt like this is our music. I remember he did an encore that people were just like humming along to the tune because we knew the words. It was an American song. And I mean, so to make it more American, I think is so important to our culture, as opposed to always trying to export something else or import something else that doesn't really speak to us these days. So I look forward to seeing the Met and what they do.
Yeah, I would say there's a fine line between representation and pandering, and I think it's weird because if they had said something like, we're going to hire one new Black conductor, oh my goodness, that's fantastic, then that would be like, come on, that's clearly just trying to shut people up essentially. But I think the fact that they're saying that they want to hire multiple people, I think that starts off on the right foot. However, it doesn't go far enough. And I think that it needs to go also to administration, also to board members, and also to programming. I mean, I think it goes without saying, but Porgy and Bess was one of the most successful shows they've had. in the past number of seasons. And I mean, almost all of my Black singer friends were cast in it, which is wonderful. But at the same time, I hope that they are also cast in the season when Metropolitan Opera comes and opens back up. You know, I hope that they're cast for other things. And those other things hopefully are not like Porgy and Bess-esque things. Even though Porgy and Bess is a wonderful, wonderful opera, and I think that it definitely deserves to be performed, and we should not perform it. But I think that there's a lot more behind hiring and representation than just showing somebody's picture on a poster saying, "Hey, we have, you know, 2 new Black conductors." I think that there's a lot deeper running things throughout an organization as big as the Metropolitan Opera and all of Lincoln Center, for that matter,
Sure.
that do need to be continuing to need to be, you know, woven through and figured out, like, how do we completely transform this so that it is empowering for all people. And yeah.
Okay. Another question I have here from Alex Ambrose, who wrote, "Brilliant and inspired combination and theatrical presentation. Absolutely love it and wish it could be required viewing for all Americans. Are you dreaming up any other poet-composer pairings?" I guess this is for you, Terrance.
I don't know any poet the way I know Langston. You know, I've got a book of poetry about the size of a Bible. He wrote so much. And you know, he went to school in Cleveland like I did, so I feel like I kind of know him, you know. So maybe after I, you know, come up with, after I'm tired of Langston, I'll move on to someone else. But I know his music. I know it's music to me. You know, when I hear it, I hear music. So I know his music. He said that, you know, poetry set to music is a lot more effective than mere words on paper. So I'm trying to give him some music. He liked it, and so I'm stuck with him right now, and I feel the same way about Beethoven, and I'm just want to get through, you know, as much of those guys as I can, and you know, maybe I'll move on after that.
Okay. There are several more questions, but it's already 5:14, so we should wrap up soon. But a really quick question for Kyle. Your piano has a name I don't recognize and a sound that's unusual. Can you tell us more? What is the piano? More about it?
Sure. This is called an Eibach piano, and it actually has 3 names: Rude, Eibach, Son. But I've only ever seen it pronounced Eibach, and this is from 1911 and was built in Germany. Has original ivory and ebony keys. And I got this piano actually from the Guarneri String Quartet's cellist, David Sawyer. His wife was a pianist, and this was her piano. And he died, I think, in 2008 or 9, and she died a few years after. Then afterwards is when somebody gave me this piano, and it's amazing, and I love this instrument. It is very unique, and it's really, it must be like somebody's individual voice in a way, because I almost can't tell how it sounds in comparison to other pianos now, because it is so much my piano. Even, you know, me recording on it, obviously for this concert, I'm always going and asking my wife, does the piano sound really out of tune? Because especially during the pandemic, I haven't been able to have my piano tuned in a little while here. And so I'm like, oh no, it sounds really out of tune. And but even if it's perfectly in tune, I'm still thinking, I'm so just self-conscious about its voice. But I love this instrument. It's got such a it might not come across in the recording, but it's got such a warm, soulful tone to it, and very, very light touch. And I love it very much. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, you play it beautifully.
Thank you.
There are still some more questions, but I think we should wrap up. But for anyone who wants to stay, if you're able to stay for just a few minutes, Terrance and Kyle, after we wrap up the program, I think there's just one or two more questions. People can stay, but I think we should wrap up for everyone else who may want to go on and cook dinner or spend time with family or whatever they need to do. Terrance, this one, I understand WQXR has a special program on Juneteenth. Would you tell us about that?
For the first time in our 80-year history, we're gonna do a Juneteenth special in which we play wall-to-wall music by Black composers and performers. So 24 hours of music by Black performers and composers. That Friday night, I'm gonna do a call-in show talking about the Black experience in the concert hall.
What time is that call-in?
It's gonna be 7 p.m. June 19th, Juneteenth.
Wonderful.
And so I'll have some guests on the program, and then we'll open it up for folks to call and just chat, and we'll talk about it.
Great, great. I just want to thank everyone again for joining today's event, Langston and Beethoven, Black and Proud, by Terrance McKnight with Kyle Walker on piano. This was presented by the Harlem Chamber Players in partnership with the Harlem Cultural Collaborative. This is the final program this season for the Harlem Chamber Players. We will return in the fall, most likely in some sort of online form. The Harlem Digital Salon Series will continue on the second and fourth Sunday of each month throughout the summer. And UN, do you want to just tell us what the next program will be? UN, if you want to unmute and stop your video, or start your video. Are you on mute? UN, you're on mute.
Okay, there you are.
Great.
Can you hear me? Thanks, everyone. It's been a real pleasure having so many of you online today. We had almost 100 viewers on, and the questions are just amazing. So I want to thank you all for joining us, actually giving up an hour and a half of your time to share with us. As Liz said, this is our first program in a series of virtual salons celebrating the Harlem Renaissance, and we'll be broadcasting twice a month on a Sunday at 4 p.m. We chose a very relaxing time when you can really sit back, enjoy, and participate. The next program will be on June 28th at 4 o'clock, Sunday, June 28th at 4. And it will be a conversation with Yuval Taylor, a recently published book on Zora and Langston, entitled Zora and Langston, A Story of Friendship and Betrayal. They'll also discuss the Harlem Renaissance at that time as well. And Yuval Taylor will be joined by Dr. Valdez, from Director of City College Black Studies Department, and Herb Boyd, journalist and author and activist. So we hope that you will join us. Details will be posted on the Harlem One Stop website, as well as the Harlem Renaissance website, harlemonestop.org and harlemrenaissance.org. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. Liz, there were a couple other questions. Did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to wrap up, and then
we should wrap up by 5:30. There's one question here where someone was asking, I don't recall it being asked. Kyle, your piano, someone was interested in the make of your piano.
Oh, yes, I asked him that already.
You did ask that one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
well, I think we're cool. Yeah. Yes.
So I just want to wrap up today and just let everyone know today's event was free and open to the public, but as you know, the arts industry, along with so many others, is really suffering. If you are able, we could really use your support. I hope that you will visit our websites and donate and sign up for our email list to learn about future programs or other news. For those of us who need to jump off, please have a wonderful rest of the day and stay safe and well. And for those, there's just a couple remaining questions. So for those people who are diehard and want to learn a little bit more, I'll get to those final questions. Thank you again. Okay, so from Ellie Hisama, we have this. She's, hello and congratulations. The poetry and the music were beautifully interwoven. Kyle's response about studying Beethoven partly answered my question, but I'd love to hear more. The question is, many institutions, including conservatories and departments of music, are thinking about expanding the canon of works taught and performed in light of the current political and social movements. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the urgent need to expand what music students, teachers, and audiences are taught and presented, including the music of Bonds, Price, Julius Eastman, Hale Smith, and so many other brilliant but lesser known composers, but also the importance of retaining commitments to the presence of composers in the canon. That is, we don't need to abandon music by white male composers, which has much to offer, but we do need to play and hear more widely. Do either of you want to take this?
Yeah, I think Terrance is muted right now, but I'll go ahead and.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think they shouldn't be thinking about doing it. They should already have been doing it, and it isn't something that needs to throw away any other composer. I mean, there's so many. That's the cool thing about music, is that it's never enough. There's never enough music. There's never too much music. There's never too many composers. There's never too much culture from different backgrounds in music. And I think that particularly when we talk about music history, you know, when we're taught in music conservatories, music history, there's sort of this hole that I've found between like the Romantic period, you know, maybe like late Brahms into Debussy, and then the next thing you're talking about is, I mean, you sort of go over these sort of weird guys like Schoenberg and Webern and people that wrote in very like tone rows, and I think that's important to learn about those styles of music, and then minimalist music. I mean, all of that is very important. But then we jump to the music of today. And there's like kind of 100 years. I mean, we're in 2020. So from Debussy, you know, 1920 through now, there's a lot of stuff that's happened, not only in music history, but just in American history. And I think that it's really, really a disservice, and it actually just sort of confuses, I think, the general public when we don't talk about what has actually happened in classical music in the past 100 years. And don't get me wrong, it's not like 100 years ago was the first Black composer. There have been Black composers. I mean, Chevalier de St. George, great example from the 1700s, who predated Mozart. And once again, he's a composer who, if we study more about his life and we learn he was a fencer, he spent time in prison, you know, these are things that just like any other composer would greatly enhance what we know about them and the way that we study their music. And so I think that, especially in the past 100 years, given everything that's happened in this nation, it's even more reason that we need to tie in that music. I mean, for anything, it could tie in other history courses with music, you know, not just music history and history, but this is the link between American history and music, and classical music for that extent.
And let me just say, Chevalier de St. George spent some time in prison because he was falsely accused. He wasn't supposed to be there.
That's right. I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that.
You can do.
Exactly right.
But I agree with that sentiment with the question, what the questioner said about expanding the rep. So important, because if you want this Browning America to start coming to classical concerts, you got to show them something other than Western European dead composers. We got to show them, you know, images and sounds from their own communities.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another question from Hassan. Can Terrance talk about how we need people to show up for Black America when the backlash occurs because equality can feel oppressive to some people?
One more time.
Okay. Can Terrance talk about how we need people to show up for Black America when the backlash occurs because equality can feel oppressive to some people?
Yeah, it's all about sharing space. You know, I think the power brokers, the majority culture is perhaps coming to the realization that there has to be a sharing of space. And I think that's why the Met is putting out that kind of statement. That's why QXR is doing a 24-hour marathon. We understand that we're better, man. We're a better country. We're better people when we share the space where everybody gets a little piece of the pie. There's enough for everybody. You know, everybody needs to have everybody needs to be well fed, you know, and nourished, and not just a few. And I think we're, you know, these last couple of weeks that we're seeing the discrepancies and, you know, who gets what and who's taken care of, who's dying more, you know, who's underserved. And I think if we can all, you know, share that big old pie, we'd be better off as a country. And so it's going to take some folks willing to share that space and stand up for the folks who aren't getting enough. And that's what we've been seeing, you know, in our beginning of our video demonstration. Who'd you see in that video? You know, you saw some folks out there standing up for, you know, some folks in the majority standing up for people like me and Kyle, which is so important. And I hope that this is something that continues and we don't turn back after, you know, some time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then a final question, actually, Nadal, if you're on the line, there was a question that from Amy Nathan. Please tell us about the graphic artist who made the program so exciting to watch. Do you want to say anything, Nadal?
Yeah, sure. I didn't plan on that, you know. I'm always in the back end of overseeing things. Yeah, well, I can say a few words. I'm Nidal Kanari Harvey. And I was so happy to work on this piece, which implies different types of collaboration, but it was very exciting for me to work on this creative content with these talented artists. And it's always a challenge for performing artists to move to a virtual space, but I admire the skills of so many talented artists to be able to adjust. And I have a creative mind as well, but what makes me the most excited all the time when I get to work on projects is when I am ignited by creative people and by people who know how to express themselves in subtle ways or how to convey the work from other people, authors, composers. And so this was very exciting to work on this. It was a lot of editing work to put this together, but I enjoyed the collaboration and the creative license that Kyle and Terrance gave me to put this together.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I think I caught all of the questions. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, everyone. This is the end of the program. Thank you, Terrance and Kyle. Thank you, Yuen Chin, for having us. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and stay safe and well.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.